Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Warm welcome from Saskatchewan. So I'm in the livestock business, and some people think that may be an oxymoron to carbon sequestration, but I hope in the next 20 minutes or so I'm going to prove that that's not true. So what I hope to do is I want to talk about, this thing works, there we go. I want to give you a little tour about my farm. First step. Then I want to talk more importantly about what I do, why I do what I do. Then I want to share a few of the results that I've achieved that I can document. Somewhat difficult to actually prove that, you know, on some of the things I say, it's a little difficult. And last of all, I want to spend a minute or two, I want to get on my little soapbox here, and I want to talk about how I think carbon policy should be from a farmer point of view. So, first of all, just to give you a little bit of orientation to Saskatchewan, you can see the blue arrow there in the bottom, that's where I live. Deep southeastern Saskatchewan. You can see Regina up at the top left. And so, the history of the farm is that in my part of the world, a 100-year-old farm is relatively rare yet. My grandfather came to that spot 103 years ago. So I'm the third generation, the fourth and fifth are now in place. And so every single screw up on that farm I can relate to either myself, my father, or my grandfather. Okay? So for the first probably 70 years, my grandfather and my father lived on the organic matter that was there. When the land was broken, he was the first farmer, it was 12% organic matter. Today, it's probably somewhere in the 4 to 5. So over that, the two generations before, I mean, they took it from 12 and worked it down to here. So when I was a smart young man and graduated from agriculture college, it was in the early 1970s, and the Green Revolution was the thing. Technology was wonderful, and I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. And I farmed high-tech industrial farming for 20 years. So I worked it down a little more yet. But all of a sudden, one day, I realized that this wasn't working anymore. Two things were happening. Number one, I was going broke. Number two was, I realized my soil health was going down. And so I had a bit of an epiphany, if you like, and I made a 180. And I said, this will not work. So I started to seed grass. For a guy that ran with grain auger mentality, where if you didn't have a grain auger and it wouldn't go through that, to all of a sudden have cows, whew, this was quite a shock. There was some learning. But so I sowed grass and started to, never owned a cow in my life, started to raise cows. And so that's what happened. So let's get there. My wife and I were blessed with 3 children, and now our oldest son is farming with us, and those are 2 of the oldest grandchildren. Now it's a lot of fun to farm with grandchildren. These little guys have some of the most interesting questions. Why do you do this, Grandpa? And it really gets you thinking. And so it's wonderful to have people on the land. We get thinking that we got to have huge farms to feed us. We need to have small farms to feed us. We need more people on the land. So, let's have the tour. So we raise three or four different things. We raise chickens, very small scale, a couple hundred chickens a year. There you can see the Salatin style chicken tractor. We move it ahead every day. And this is what's the important part of this particular thing, is what happens after those chickens were on the land. And you can see the land is totally packed down. Every single square inch of that land has got chicken manure on it. And what's really important then is that, whoops, sorry, I gotta go back. I'm missing a picture. Okay. But anyway, so what that does then is it does tremendous things to the land. So here we have a production system that is putting out a superior nutritive product. The chickens that I raise are phenomenal compared to what you go and buy at the local store. So it's a great nutritional experience to eat. It's good for my body. Plus, at the same time, I'm building the land. Cool movement, eh? Regenerative agriculture. So we also raise a few turkeys. And here you see the grandchildren and grandma, they're busy feeding surplus lettuce to the turkeys. So we're recycling material through that we can't use directly out of the garden through the turkeys, which eventually we will use again. So one of our main crops is raising cattle. And you can see here, I think I have an arrow. Right here there was a fence a few minutes ago. And you can see the difference on the landscape between where the cattle just were and where the cattle are now. And so that's what we do, is we move animals across the landscape on a daily basis. Lots of animals on a small area for a few minutes, or a day maybe, then we move it ahead. So now this this spot right here now rests for somewhere between 70 to 100 days till we come back to this spot. So we give that land ample opportunity to recover. So that's the name of the game. So that's what we do. Just another picture of animals, different year, different time. But again, you can see a lot of animals on a very small area. We call it holistic planned grazing or adaptive multi-paddock grazing, whichever is the particular term you happen to like. My son, when he joined the operation, he started in with, he thought sheep were the way to go. So again, this is a very early spring picture here. A lot of sheep on a small area again. And you can see that they're tramping the land down. They're getting that dead grass from last year tramped down to the surface. So there's two parts to grazing. One is what the animals eat, but the most important part is, what do those feet do? That's where the gain comes from building land. If you want to be regenerative, it's what the feet are doing to the land. That's where the power is of grazing. Another picture of sheep. This is my favorite picture right here. Most of my neighbors at this point in time have now been feeding cattle for 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the year. I'm still eating green grass in Saskatchewan. That's money right there, folks. So one of the things that's really important is putting that litter down on the land. We want to take the grass, whether they eat this much, whether they eat it right to the ground, whether they take the top bite off is irrelevant to me. I want to know what those feet do to the land and push the grass down. That's what's critical. So if I don't do a good, I'm missing a few pictures here for some reason. And that's okay. We'll keep going. So in the winter then, we do have to feed for part of the year. Usually I don't like to feed much more than 3 months, 100 days max. We push it as far as we can, but we do have to feed. So what we do then is we buy hay from our neighbors. We are importing their organic matter. And so we put it on top of some of these hilltops that my dad, my grandfather, and I eroded away. And so we're rebuilding the organic matter by using those hay bales on those spots. So this is kind of what it looks like in the spring. It looks like a heck of a mess. And the first time you do it, you go, oh my God, what did I do? But hang on, it gets better. Just another picture of grazing again, and another picture of the spring. And it's awesome. We've done measurements in some of these spots, and we've had up to 800% increase in production 1 year after field grazing. 800%. So it's phenomenal what it does. So we're basically importing the neighbor's organic matter because he has no appreciation for it and putting it on our land is what we're really doing. So that's kind of the quick tour. So I think what's important though is to understand why we farm this way. As I said, we made a little 180 turn back about 20 years ago after I realized that what we were doing wasn't going to work long term. And so there's basically, along the way I received some exposure to holistic management. Dee Pershaus talked about that a little bit yesterday, and I think Judith Schwartz did too. But it's really important to know what it is you want to do. We need to have a goal, we need to have a purpose to life, and that's important to have that figured out. We also have to be profitable. Those are two critical things. And the third thing we have to do is we have to look after our land. If our land is going down, or sustaining is the popular word, you're going backwards, people. we have to be regenerating it. If we aren't making it better, we are not going to survive as a species on this planet. So what we do then is when I talk about the land part of things, there's 4 things I want to be doing: solar, mineral, water, and diversity. So I want to go into each one of those for a couple minutes. This is some work that Peter Donovan is doing, the Soil Carbon Coalition. You can see the blue square there in the center is my home square mile of land. It's my home piece of land. This is a composite photograph from Landsat. The entire 2010 series of photographs are condensed into one picture. And what it is, it's an NDVI, or Normal Digitized Vegetation Index. And so you can see the darker the green, the more photosynthesis that's happening. So what we were curious about is, how good am I at capturing light? And so we put a red square that is a neighbor's. So we did a township around my section of land. And then we were curious to see what did it actually mean. So in a bar graph, it's fairly easy to see. There's 12 years of data there. Every single year, I beat the neighbors considerably. And I think we've heard over the last 3 days that if we don't have photosynthesis, there's no sugar going down. We've got to put sugar down. That's how we build carbon. That's how we make life. So this is critical. So when we think about solar collection, there's 3 things we can do. Number 1 is we can put more leaves in. So if I have a leaf here and a leaf here, to put another one in between them, like this, I guess, would be better. If I have a leaf here and a leaf here, to make them twice as big, I'm obviously going to catch twice as much solar energy. But the biggest gain of all is time. And you think about cropping systems. Most cropping systems capture energy for 70 days of the year. Corn maybe is up to 100. In my part of the world, I have the potential to capture energy from the minute the snow melts to the minute the snow arrives. It might be somewhat limited towards the very ends of those, but I can. You saw the picture of the green grass there in December the 19th. There was still photosynthesis happening there for maybe between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. For a little limited amount of time. So it's critical that we look at time. So the second thing then that's really important is to have an effective water cycle. So in this case, we're on the left-hand side there, you can see a non-effective water cycle. Here we are, a dry spring, bare land, sun is shining on that land, it's warmer, evaporation happens, out it goes. Water is totally 100% ineffective for the plants. On the right-hand side, the land is covered in litter. One of the easiest ways to think about litter is think about the skin on your bodies. If I had a major event and lost all the skin on this arm, it would not likely be good for the longevity of this arm. Or we've heard about horror stories of people being burnt, and they usually don't last very long. Well, think of litter on the surface of the earth exactly like the skin on your body. It's the same thing, people. And if you take a drive across Quebec or Saskatchewan or Vermont or Texas, wherever you want to look, we have done a dismal job of keeping litter on the land. And if we want to be successful and begin to really capture carbon big time, we need to figure out farming systems that keep our land covered. So this is the single most destructive force on the planet, water hitting bare earth. You see the raindrop there. And when that happens, we basically make the water cycle totally 100% ineffective. Instead of that water hitting like this and going down, the water comes and it goes this way. Lateral movement. So it can be, various people talked about this yesterday, we can have a rain today, tomorrow we're in a drought again, because the water did not do any good. So what we need to do is figure out systems that make sure that that water goes in, and what you do is you put litter on the land. That's how you solve it. So right here we have just an example of infrastructure damage because of water flow. We're all very familiar with this. What's interesting in this picture, the culvert is totally tunneled out there by water. Within 1 day later, that culvert was totally gone. But it's fascinating to me, right along the edge of the road there, here's a little bit of grass strip, and the water can't get rid of the grass strip. The power of litter on the land. Whereas the bare land, it's the hard gravel road, is gone. So the third thing then is we need to talk about the mineral cycle. And we had a number of speakers talk about that yesterday, so I'm not going to spend any time on it, other than to say I just need to make sure it works. The key to that is get the land covered up, keeps it cooler in a hot day, warmer in a cold day, and make sure you have an effective water cycle. The mineral cycle, all these bugs and fungi and so on, don't work real well if there's no moisture down there. So we've got to keep them moist, and we've got to keep them cool and warm. So get the land covered, make the water cycle go in, and then that mineral cycle will work. So the last one then is the concept of community dynamics, or diversity. And this little graph right here shows you as you move to the right, you tend to get more stability, more resilience. As you move to the left, you tend to get much more, 10? Is that what it was? Much more up and down the species. You get, disease, pests come in. We heard about Colorado potato beetles yesterday, all sorts of things like this happen when we start to move to the left. So when you think about that, think about our modern industrial agriculture. Where do we want to be on that scale? Want to be to the right or to the left? To the left. In fact, in my province, we worship the god of monoculture. We worship it. If I was a wheat farmer along a major road, and at the end of spraying season, there was 4 or 5 wild oats left in that field, that would be coffee shop talk in Red River, Saskatchewan. Did you see that Blain's field? He missed those wild oats. That's how badly we worship monoculture. And so we have to somehow get that out of our heads, and we have to move towards the right, get more diversity in our systems. So when I look at a grazing example, these are native plants that grow out in the part of the world where I do. You can see they all have tremendously different rooting systems. Each one of these things has a different association of bugs underneath there, fungi, bacteria, you name it. When my cow comes along and talks, she's pretty darn sharp. She's got a tremendous nose. And she knows that this particular plant right here might be we'll say it's this one right here, might be good in copper, lots of copper in it. So she'll take a bite of that particular plant. Tomorrow maybe she needs zinc, so she'll take one of that plant over there. She can totally balance her diet if she has diversity in the field. But now I get talked into, boy, that's not very efficient. Mr. Salesman comes along and says, hey, if you buy this new hybrid tetraploid ryegrass or whatever, get that rounded up out of there, plant our new technology here, put fertilizer on it, man, will you ever have more production. So I buy into that. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to start going to town and buying artificial supplements to keep my cows happy. Now, is that progress or not? I'm not sure. So some of the other things that we do in diversity is we encourage birds of all sorts. This happens to be tree swallows there. We have creatures like that out in our grasslands. We don't mind that. We have creatures like that out in our grassland also. We also like to have, as you saw earlier, grandchildren out there. That's part of diversity. Also, we have beehives. I didn't show you that, but we do have a very small scale bee operation. So the more things that we can do to add diversity into our system, the better we like it. So some of the results. So here's the first one. So on the left-hand side, you can see the neighbor's quarter. They started grazing on the 15th of May, and so this is what I call a continuous graze system. So he put the cattle in there, and the cattle had access to the entire quarter section, or 160 acres, for the entire time. And what's the important part is look at the rubber boots. How high is the grass? So on the right-hand side, we do it a little bit different. That's my place. We had almost virtually double the number of cattle. We started grazing on the 10th of April, so at 98 days when this picture's taken. And take a look at the rubber boots on that picture. So I think you can see there's a bit of a difference. This next picture here is just what I call a plug. I just took a shovel and dug 2 pieces of grass out of, or 2 pieces of sod out. On the left-hand side was some land that had no animal impact. It was just planted to grass and left. On the right-hand side is what I call a planned graze piece, or the type of grazing that I'm doing. I think it's pretty obvious to see the difference. And on the left-hand side, you can see the litter is still standing up. It hasn't been pushed down to make it recycle. This year we became, Naomi and our farm became part of a study. It's being done by Agriculture Canada, and they're looking at a whole lot of aspects. They're comparing conventional grazers to plan grazers like myself, so I'm paired up with a conventional grazer, virtually identical soil types. They're within 2 miles of each other. The only difference is the management of how the cattle do on the land. And so one of the parameters of the study was grassland birds. So we had 2 bird counters come out at 4 a.m. They had 10 sites on each spot. They spent 5 minutes on each spot listening. Boom, they kept moving. So it took them about an hour and a half to do that. So you can see on my particular property on the right-hand side, we had 137 total birds, 32 species. The conventional piece had 85 species or individuals and 28 species. So is that significant? I don't know yet. But this is being done across 18 sites across Western Canada, and over the next few years, I think we will likely see that the system that I'm running is superior. This is just a way we measure yield. We call it animal days an acre. For grain farmers, it's like bushels per acre. I'm not going to get into how we measure it, but that's just, you can see it slowly goes up. So the last thing I want to mention here is carbon. And you can see that we've been monitoring carbon now since 2011. And so we're at 22.88 tons per hectare. Now that's quite a bit over 1,000, so I'll tell you that. So this is quite a fairly astounding number, really. A lot of people aren't sure that's quite correct, and I don't know, maybe time will tell, maybe it isn't. But right now we know that that's what was there from 11 to 14. So each one of us has a footprint of about 18.9. So yesterday there was just about 400 people in this hall. I don't know if there's quite as many today, but that means that I can, on my particular operation of 320 hectares, I more than sequestered every person in this hall's yesterday's footprint. So thank you. So just for interest's sake, I will be at the back later. I would expect your checks in. So now I want to get into the really important part here, and that's my thoughts on carbon. So 10,000 years ago, our ancestors decided it was more fun to settle down and grow food than it was to chase it. So at that point in time, there was about 8.5 billion hectares or 8 billion hectares of forest, 5 billion hectares of rangeland. Today, we've taken that down to 3.5 billion hectares of forest, of which half is second cut. We have 4 billion hectares of rangeland, 1.5 billion hectares of cropland, and we created one brand new category called desert, 4 billion hectares, 30%. Pretty wonderful story. Well, we took the population from about 1 million to 7.5 billion too. So it hasn't been a total failure. But I don't think we can keep going like this way. I think the UN says it's about 23 hectares per minute are desertifying right now. So if we want to have any effect and really and truly change the climate, what we need to do is we need to start to regreen the planet very, very rapidly. The single biggest factor in climate is water vapor, people, not carbon dioxide. It's water vapor. And cooling the planet is critical. So we have to start to regreen. We have to make that 4 billion hectares of rangeland more effective. We have to start to graze it like I am. We have to take that cropland and figure out how to keep it greener longer. And we have to start reversing desertification. Greenland is cooler than bare land. I think we all know that. So we have to start cooling the planet. So we all know about all the benefits of carbon. So yesterday, Dee Dee talked a little bit about how do we get farmers to change. And you know, we could have this rate full of farmers from Saskatchewan, and I can guarantee at the end of the 3-day conference, not one of them would change the way they farm. They all know, but when you got $5 million or $7 million worth of debt, and you had a 60 bushel crop planned, you got 40 bushel, the guy that you got $1 million out to the input company, and he's kind of chewing on your rear end to get that paid, do you think you're going to go to some crazy new system? Not a hope. And also, there is peer pressure. So if we want to change it, people, you change it by paying me to do it. The example that I showed you works out to $175 an acre, is what at the rate Alberta is taxing at $20 a ton on CO2. My sequestration rates at 22.88 tons per hectare work out to $175 per acre per year. Now, if I was getting a check every year for $150,000, $160,000 for carbon sequestration, I can guarantee this room full of farmers would be extremely attentive when I gave this talk. If we want to have drastic change in the world rapidly, which I think we all are coming to the realization we have to pay the people that are wanting to do it. Thank you very much.